No one expected this moment. It wasn't in the program. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't part of any carefully crafted media strategy. When King Charles III approached the podium that day, facing an audience of world leaders, health experts, and global media, no one expected anything unusual. Known for his thoughtful diplomatic speeches, this was expected to be more of the same. But something different happened. He paused. He looked out across the hall. A silence settled. Then his eyes rested on a group of Filipino guests seated among the crowd. Another moment passed. Quiet, still, heavy with meaning. And then he spoke. Just one sentence. The resilience, kindness, and dedication of Filipinos are something the world should learn from. You don't just work with your hands, you work with your heart. There was no immediate applause, no music, no cameras flashing, just silence. A silence filled with emotion. Because in that moment, millions of Filipinos, watching from London to Manila, from Dubai to Toronto, felt something they had longed for, to be truly seen, not for their job titles or status, but for their spirit, for who they are. It wasn't a royal address. It wasn't a political statement. It was something deeper, an affirmation. For generations, Filipino workers, especially in healthcare and caregiving, have served quietly across the globe, in hospital rooms, nursing homes, unfamiliar houses they've made into homes, with calm patience and warm hearts. Rarely recognized, never demanding the spotlight. That single sentence broke through years of silence. It wasn't just gratitude, it was a declaration. You don't just work with your hands, you work with your heart. Tears welled in many eyes that day, not from surprise, but from recognition. Finally, someone had said what needed to be said. A king, no less. And not just to the Filipinos in the room, but to the world. Since then, those words have echoed online and across communities, shared in posts, repeated in conversations, passed between overseas workers who've often wondered in quiet moments, does anyone see me? That day, the answer was yes, because King Charles didn't just look at them, he saw them, not just as workers, but as people of rare strength and compassion. They don't wear crowns, they don't sit in parliaments, they don't make the headlines, but they show up in hospital wards, elder homes, clinics, and private residences with hearts full of care. They bring comfort, dignity, and love. Quiet heroes. As of 2024, more than 40,000 Filipinos are working in healthcare and caregiving across the UK. Many in hospitals, some in homes, a few even serving royal families. But what makes them stand out isn't just their training, it's their humanity. Ask any patient. An elderly woman in Manchester said, "She didn't just take my blood pressure. She held my hand, sang me to sleep. I don't know how I'd have made it through surgery without her." A man in Liverpool, grieving his wife's passing, recalled, "It was a Filipino nurse who stayed until sunrise, helping me cry, holding me when I had no strength left." That's what King Charles recognized, not with fanfare, but with truth. In a world that often values status over service, his words turned attention to those whose greatness is in how they care, how they love, how they serve. It was more than a sentence. It was history acknowledging heart. A sacred duty. In the Philippines, caring for the elderly isn't considered a task. It is a sacred responsibility. From childhood, Filipinos are taught, when your grandparents can no longer walk, you become their legs. When your parents grow weary, you become the shoulder they lean on. So when Filipinos leave home to work abroad, they don't just carry documents and degrees. They carry a vow, a tradition, an identity woven from love and duty. They are not merely part of a workforce. They are quiet warriors of compassion. A hero doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes a hero wears scrubs and tired eyes. Sometimes a hero's hands are calloused, not from combat, but from hours of caring, lifting, feeding, comforting. And while they may not wear medals around their necks, they carry something more powerful, thousands of whispered thank yous from healed souls. So when King Charles III stood before the world and said his words of gratitude, the applause wasn't just for him. It was for the unspoken. It was for the unseen. It was for them, Filipinos, heroes. The final days of a queen. Have you ever wondered who stood beside Queen Elizabeth II in her final moments? It wasn't the generals, not the royal doctors, not the powerful courtiers. It was the Filipino nurses. According to royal insiders, during the final chapter of the Queen's life at Windsor, many in her care team were of Filipino descent. They cared for her not with formality, but with affection, as if she were their own grandmother. They weren't featured in headlines. No medals were pinned to their chests. No grand ceremonies in their honor. But they were there, whispering prayers, holding her hand through the night, adjusting blankets when no one was looking. A close source revealed that the Queen didn't want many people around her. She wanted peace, and the Filipinos understood that. They offered care like a quiet breeze, gentle, warm, and steady. They worked beyond their shifts, not for overtime pay, not out of obligation, but out of love. One nurse slept on a folding chair, always ready. Another held a small rosary and prayed in soft Tagalog when the Queen was in pain. Their names will never be known to history. They won't appear in royal biographies. But if the Queen could have spoken one final word of thanks, perhaps it would have been Salamat. Because in the final hours of a great life, what a person needs most is not power, but tenderness. And no one understands tenderness quite like Filipinos. In the Philippines, elders are not sent away. They stay home. We wash their feet. We sing them to sleep. And when their memory fades, we become their memory. These caregivers didn't go to Windsor Castle to serve a monarchy. They went to serve a grandmother. They weren't in photos by the Queen's coffin. They didn't sit in honored seats at the national funeral. But they were there, where there were no cameras, no applause, no spotlight, only love. And perhaps if you had asked the Queen in her final days, who stood by you? She would have smiled softly and said, my Filipino grandchildren. In the dark days of the pandemic, when COVID-19 swept across the world, life came to a standstill. Cities fell silent, airports closed, schools and churches went dark. But hospitals, they could not close. And in those cold, fluorescent corridors, the quiet heroes walked in. Filipinos once again. They didn't come for safety, they came to fight. In a London hospital, a Filipino nurse worked 18 hours a day, resting only in stolen moments, her head on her hands, still in full protective gear. In Birmingham, a Filipino healthcare worker tested positive for the virus, but refused to take leave, choosing instead to serve until her body demanded rest. These stories aren't rare. They're everyday truths. Because for Filipinos, caring isn't a profession. It's a calling. In moments when the world shut down, they stepped forward. Not for medals, not for recognition, but because that's who they are. A quiet light in the darkest night. She was afraid that if she stopped, just for a moment, someone would die alone. She feared that if she rested, the night shift would be short-staffed. Patients might suffer in silence. And so she kept going. Then in May 2020, the British press reported, a 47-year-old Filipino nurse passed away after 12 days in the hospital battling COVID-19. She left behind 2 young children and a husband, also a healthcare worker. Her colleagues placed a small plaque in the break room. It read, she didn't just work, she gave, and she was not the only one. According to the UK's National Nurses Association, over 70 Filipino nurses lost their lives during the peak of the pandemic, a number that may seem small in national statistics. But each one was a universe to the families left waiting, unable even to bring their loved one's ashes home. The world was in panic. People feared eye contact. They avoided touch. Even proximity became dangerous. But the Filipinos, they touched. They held the hands of the dying. They wiped the tears of strangers. They sang lullabies to those about to depart this world. And many times in the final moments of a person's life, it wasn't a doctor or family member nearby. It was a Filipino nurse whispering gently, you are not alone. They didn't complain. No protests, no hashtags, no demands. They just kept showing up, day after day, night after night, because to them, this wasn't a shift. This wasn't a job. This was a calling. So when King Charles III stood before the world's health leaders and said, we couldn't do this without you, it wasn't a line in a speech, it was the truth. In the deadliest battle of the 21st century, It was the Filipinos who stood quietly at the front lines. They weren't on magazine covers. No monuments were built. There was no national mourning, but what they left behind can never be erased. A kindness that made even the strongest nations bow their heads in gratitude. A nation that doesn't just work with skill, but with soul. Why are Filipinos called the best caregivers in the world? Not because they graduated from elite schools, not because they are masters of technology, but because they carry something rarer than any certification: a way of life. In the Philippines, caregiving isn't learned in classrooms, it's learned at home. From a young age, children are taught, when your grandfather is weak, feed him. When your grandmother's feet ache, massage them. And when someone is in pain, you stay. You show up. You don't look away. Filipinos grow up in multi-generational homes. There are no retirement centers. There is no leaving the elderly behind. Grandparents, parents, children, all under one roof. So when they leave home to serve the world, they don't just bring skills, they bring home with them. And they bring the heart of their culture in every act of care. An English doctor once said, "When I'm cared for by a Filipino nurse, I don't just feel better, I feel loved." That love is not grand or poetic. It's practical, quiet, and fierce. It is staying late to comfort a patient. It is wiping away tears with gentleness. It is missing your own child's birthday just to be present for someone else's parent. A faith that moves hands. Few talk about this, but over 86% of Filipinos are Catholic. And for many of them, work isn't just work, it's faith in action. They believe caregiving is not just service, it's sacred. As it says in the Bible, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. Filipinos carry this belief into every task: helping a patient stand, whispering prayers at the bedside, hugging a stranger as if it were their own mother. At a hospital in Glasgow, a Filipino nurse stayed behind after her shift to sit beside an elderly man with no relatives. She didn't speak. She just held his hand and softly sang a lullaby in Tagalog. The man passed away that night, not alone, not cold, but held by someone the world might never know. An angel simply wearing a name tag that said Philippines. They don't wear white robes. They have no halos, but their kindness shines and their light is real. Filipinos do not seek glory, but they give it every day with every quiet act of love. They are not just workers. They are not just migrants. They are not just statistics. They are the soul in every room that needs care. They are the heart in every battle against death and despair. They are the heroes we didn't know we needed until they showed up and never left. They don't need a crown. They don't need others to call them heroes. They just need to believe that kindness still matters in this world. And when King Charles III said, "You don't just work with your hands, you work with your heart," he wasn't just talking about skill, he was speaking about a soul, a nation, a way of life. That day in a grand hall filled with global delegates, the king didn't just read from a prepared speech. He paused, he looked up. He looked at the Filipinos in the room, and he said what millions had waited decades to hear. "We couldn't do this without you." It wasn't diplomacy, it was recognition. A confirmation that Filipino caregivers are no longer the invisible backbone of healthcare. They are seen, they are valued, they belong. A journalist at the event wrote, "I've never seen so many people wiping away tears at an international conference." A Filipino doctor, working in the UK for 18 years, posted online, "This is the first time I feel like I truly belong." Because sometimes a single sentence, spoken in the right place, at the right time, can begin to heal a history of silence, a history built on quiet sacrifice. For generations, Filipinos have lived in dedication. They have cared for others across oceans, missing birthdays, weddings, funerals, without asking for recognition. They have served in silence, loved without seeking applause, sacrificed without complaint. And now, a king, the head of the oldest monarchy in Europe, has spoken not just on behalf of Britain, but for the world. History may never record every night shift, every whispered prayer, every quiet goodbye at a hospital bed. But this moment, this acknowledgement, was enough for a whole community to feel seen. And from that single hall in London, the words echoed outward, to the U.S. where thousands of Filipino nurses continue to serve on the front lines, to Italy where they care for the elderly as if they were their own grandparents, to Canada, Japan, Saudi Arabia. Wherever there are Filipinos, there was a ripple of emotion. We see you. We thank you. And that gratitude wasn't just the king's. It was the voice of millions of patients who never got the chance to say thank you. What happens now? A single sentence can't erase years of separation. It won't bring back missed milestones. It won't close the distance between a mother working nights in London and a child growing up in Manila. But it can be a beginning of a world that listens more, sees more, recognizes not just those in the spotlight, but those in hospital corridors, in kitchens, in intensive care units, where life and love are most raw and most real. Maybe you're watching this, and you're a Filipino far from home. Maybe you've been cared for by one, or maybe you simply believe that kindness still counts. So ask yourself, what can I do to honor them? Not just with words, but with action. Maybe it's a message, a hug, a thank you for the wife, the brother, the mother working the night shift in a land not their own. Maybe it's sharing this story so that those who've never heard it can finally feel it, because all great change begins with the smallest recognition. You don't need to be a king to say thank you. You just need to be human. You just need to still believe in one another. To the ones still giving today, the king spoke for an entire generation. We couldn't do this without you. And tomorrow, let us tell them, you are not invisible. You are the finest part of humanity. If you're still watching, maybe something in this story stirred your heart. Maybe because you too are living far from home, or maybe because you've been cared for by someone who gave with quiet grace. Together we've walked a path, from a surprising royal tribute to hospital corridors lit by unseen love, to the whispered legacy of the Filipino spirit. Because the truth is this, you don't need a crown to be royalty. You don't need to be on a stage to be a hero. You just need to wake up each day and give with empathy, with patience, with your whole heart. Just like the millions of Filipinos who live unseen, but never stop giving. If someone comes to mind right now, someone who's cared for you, someone you miss, someone you never thanked, send them this story. Let them know they are seen, they are worthy, they are loved. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, stories of kindness, sacrifice, and humanity, like, follow, and share. Because there are still so many stories that deserve to be told, deserve to be heard, and deserve to be remembered. Thank you for staying. Thank you for listening with your heart. We'll see you again in the next story, where the light still flickers in the most silent of people.